Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning for the Oregon State Board of Agriculture meeting. Today is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. This is Elin Miller, Chair of the Board. The meeting is now called to order. Note that public comment is scheduled today for 11 o'clock. We received one written public comment ahead of today's meeting. If you'd like to sign up for the meeting to provide verbal comments, please make a request by using the chat box, including your name and organization, or use the sign-up sheet on the entry table if you're here in person. Comment time will be limited to 3 minutes per person. This meeting is being recorded, and board members and guests, please state your name in advance of your statements for the record. I begin by asking Department of Agriculture Board Coordinator Carla Valnes to review a few housekeeping items for us this morning.
Good morning. This is Carla. Just a reminder to please mute your phones or computer audio during the call to prevent any unnecessary background noise. We request that only board members and presenters turn on your camera during the call. And also, if you're joining the call online, you can find pre-meeting materials posted at the ODA website at oda.direct/board-agriculture, or additional information will be posted after the meeting. And just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Carla. Before we go through roll call, I'll note a lot of work went into the board book this time to be able to provide some context for each piece, and that was available out for the public to take a look at so we can kind of look at the purpose and the focus. So I just want to say thank you to actually everyone on the team for making that happen, but Carla, you spearheaded that, so thank you for that. So that is a change that we've already actually received a written email complimenting us on that from someone in the public, so that was pretty cool. Carla, will you please call the roll for introductions? I'll begin. Elin Miller, Farmer, Umpqua.
Chad Allen.
Chad Allen, Dairyman and Tillamook.
Barbara Boyer.
Barbara Boyer, Chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Commission.
Brian Harper, I believe is absent today. Ty Cleaver.
Ty Cleaver, farmer and brewer, hailing from Klamath Falls.
Miguel Lopez.
Miguel Lopez, grape grower, Willamette Valley.
Ellie Norris.
Ellie Norris, farmer, Douglas County.
Eric Orem.
Good morning, Eric Orem, farmer from Heppner.
Luisa Santa Maria is absent this morning. Josh Zielinski.
Josh Zielinski, farmer and nurseryman from Salem.
Dean Simonich.
Stacy Simonich, Dean of OSU's College of Agricultural Sciences and Director of the Oregon Agricultural Experiment Station.
Director Sharpelo Hansen.
Lisa Sharpelo Hansen, Director of the Department of Agriculture.
Again, just a reminder to please use the chat box to sign in if you're online, and we'll go around the room quickly. Start with Rusty.
Eric Garman, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Laura Passage, Department of Agriculture. Honey Summers, Department of Ag.
All right. The first agenda item today will be the approval of the minutes. The minutes are in your board packet. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those, and I would entertain a motion to approve.
Madam Chairman, Ty Cleaver for the record. I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Josh Zielinski, second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Great. Next, we'll move into the director's report, and I'll also note, which which Director Sharplow Henson probably will do as well, that we've moved the reports from our various departments up to her report, which makes a lot of sense. I like that move that we made. So we'll also, during the director's report section, we'll also be covering any questions you might have on department reports as well, because it all just kind of flows together. So, Lisa.
Thank you. Well, good morning. It's great to see everybody. So a couple of things. Chair Miller mentioned it, but the board packet. I hope this is helpful, and I really want to thank Carla publicly for her work in putting this together so that you have backgrounders for each of the agenda items. We realized in September when we had a couple of the conversations, we have a tendency in the agency sometimes to start in the middle because we're there in it all the time, and recognizing that you all may not have had the opportunity to start at start. And so hopefully these backgrounders as we move forward will help to give you more of the setup for the discussions we're going to have here at the board. In terms of the board, exciting. The governor reappointed Josh Zielinski and Elin Miller to the board. It's taken a bit for the new board members. Late yesterday, we received notice that Kirk Mogg has been appointed to the board. So he'll be with you at the next meeting. There's some more work that we need to do, and the governor's still doing additional consideration for the other position. So hopefully by the time we meet in March, we'll have the other appointment and have a full board again. So that is really exciting, and we look forward to welcoming Kirk here with us. In your packet, you have a update on our strategic plan. It's a quarterly update. This was our first time doing this in writing for the board. Jonathan, thank you, and Taylor for putting together a format. We would accept any comments, ideas for how we might improve it or what else you would like included in those updates. But what I would say about the work that we've been doing and looking toward the strategic plan, we've been doing a lot of work that's foundational work for the agency. In the last quarter, we brought our managers, all of the managers together in person for the first time since pre-COVID. And they did an overnight training. The most exciting thing for me was that came out of this, all the managers said, you know, we want more continuity and consistency across all of the programs in the agency and how they're managed and around decisions. And so we're really putting more focus into kind of those standard operating procedures that help us rebuild the foundation within, because there are a lot of new people, and we're recognizing that we need to standardize more things. We also did a director's office retreat. We'll do another one of those Friday. And so we're doing more and more full all-staff meeting was last Thursday. We did an in-person all-staff meeting. It was about half and half in terms of people in person and online, but we had a training that from an organization called On Your Feet that was a lot about bringing people together, learning to have conversations, and working on being, you know, world-class listeners. And so you will continue to hear about more of that type of work that we're doing, and we're really finding it pays dividends with the staff. We've also gone to having a monthly virtual staff meeting for the whole agency. And there are several things we're focusing on there. One, we've talked about the foundation and the policies and procedures. We're also doing a lot of focus on safety. Lindsay has done an amazing job working on this. We've had some issues over the last year around some safety issues, and Lindsay's taken that on and spearheading working with our safety committee, reinvigorating our safety committee post-COVID. It's one of those things that slipped some, and we have a lot of work to do, but we are headed there and really working on creating a new culture around safety in the agency. The other thing I would mention is fall is the season of meetings and dinners, and Dean Simonich and I seem to show up in a lot of the same places, and I look through Instagram and I happen to be in some of her pictures. So there you go. You can track us together. It's been a busy, busy fall since we saw you in September. The other thing I would mention I think it's the first time that we've been in person since we implemented. We have done a restructure in the agency in terms of an organizational structure. I will call it tweaking the organizational structure. We've gone to a dual deputy system, much like other agencies. So Lindsay Ng and Jonathan Sandow are now co-deputies for the department. We're in the process of recruiting for a chief operating officer that will oversee our business functions and be part of that team as well. Additionally, we've realigned some of our programs, and most notably, if you've looked at the org chart, it'll be a field services section. Casey Prentice is leading the field services section, and we've taken our programs where we are out in the field, working either with licensees, weights and measures, brand inspection, shipping point inspection, our seed programs, and put those under Casey, as well as he's working towards creating what we're going to call a general inspector that can do work for some of the other programs like food safety where we don't need a sanitarian. And so really trying to have people in local communities that are more full-time jobs that are part of that community to reduce our time and mileage and ultimately, hopefully, increase our efficiencies and our ability to serve around the state. And so we're really excited about that work. It's a big lift, and it's a big change in culture to work through that, but it's something I think we all are very committed to across the entire executive team. We also are now calling we used to call them program directors. They're division directors, and we've gone back to using the term division. And in terms of that alignment, it really is a very small change, but as we tried to work through it, it helps to simplify. And again, it aligns more with other state agencies. So I'll pause there around the organizational changes and see if any of you have any questions or comments. Okay. Additionally, we have some new staff, and I'm looking around to see, yeah, Laura's here. So Laura Passage, she's in the back of the room. Many of you probably met her last night. She is serving as the executive assistant for all of us. Get to know Laura. You will love her. She's full of energy, and she has a can-do attitude and is a fixer. And we just love having her in the director's office and part of the team. So welcome and thank you for joining us so that she has the opportunity to learn more about the board while she's here as well. It's been a busy season in terms of high-path avian influenza and animal health. Dr. Schultz will be here on Thursday, and he'll likely talk about a little of this, but we had a novel situation a couple of months ago in a backyard flock. Backyard flock had high-path AI. It was a multi-species situation where they had animals commingled. We had the first swine case of avian influenza in the United States, with 2 of the pigs testing positive. It's been dealt with and taken care of in terms of eradication, but it was novel. It created a lot of concern and a lot of work with USDA around it, and a lot of work with the National Veterinary Service Laboratory. So continuing to watch, but the animal health team, they've been rock stars in terms of working through some of these situations that are complicated and complex moving forward. Let me see. I had like a whole list of things. You'll hear about the governor's recommended budget in the next presentation. We completed a tribal report for the governor and the legislature. I think it's in your packet. We wanted to include that this time just so you guys could have a better sense of some of the other work that we're doing in the reports that we need to do statutorily. We also met with Oregon State University College of Ag Sciences leadership team and are working at continuing to create closer connections with OSU and finding more ways to cooperate and together moving forward. Sunny Summers, who's in the back of the room, participated in several emergency management exercises. And so she is our go-to at ODA for if something really bad happens. Sunny's a coordinator and knows what to do. And this was tested recently. I don't remember. I was out and about, but there were tsunami warnings on the South Coast. And Sunny and Jonathan and the team in the director's office quickly went into action to make contact with our staff on the coast and to be able to identify where people were at. And so it was a good exercise for us to test the system and figure out where we might have some holes. And I think they found a couple of places, and we will work to make changes in those going forward. Since our last meeting as well, Lauren Henderson retired and is finished. Jim Johnson retired. And then another big item, if you have time to go and look, we have a new website update out and about. Taylor in our office worked for months bringing things together, bringing staff together to put the website in place. And really, it has that customer focused feel about it is our goal. And we're talking a lot about the customer feel and the customer interactions that we have at ODA. And that, again, goes back to the strategic plan and all three principles within it and what we're looking to as we make decisions moving along. So the last thing I would mention as we move into 2025, we've been thinking about what's really important in terms of themes and what we'll be talking about. And I think we've landed on resilience. And whether that's resilience in the agency or resilience in agriculture, it's what do we do when we have tough times? How do we respond? How do we build our systems so that they come back and we all come back and can thrive and continue to move on? And so resilience will be a big theme as we think about what we're doing. And along with that, then it ties to for the next generation. And so we're going to try and do more thinking about what do we do next generation. You had opportunity last night to interact with the Oregon FFA state officers. So making those connections of how do we draw people in, young people into agriculture or new people to agriculture for our resilience. So I will stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Barbara Boyer. A couple of questions. So the tribal report's awesome. Do we have a tribal liaison?
We do have a tribal liaison. Thank you for the question. Christina Higbee. She's in the Natural Resources Division. She does a lot of our customer help around our pesticide program as well as the tribal work for us.
And then another question. I'm curious where the CAFO lead position is at. Can Isaac answer that?
Or I can answer.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah. We've had a failed recruitment. I think it's 2 failed recruitments. And so we are re-recruiting again to work through identifying a new CAFO manager. Hiring is a challenge. And we're, I think, have done some rewriting and trying to figure out how do we reach out to a broader pool of people to draw talent into the agency.
And are you done with your report?
I am happy to be done with my report.
Oh, no, I'm just curious because I just had a comment to talk about what you and I did with the Farm to School program. I thought it would fit underneath your director's report. So I accompanied Lisa to a event at the Lucky Mute Charter School, and it was called Crunch at Once. And it was a really great event. Lisa did a great job. Amy Gilroy and myself. Who was that?
And Andrea.
And Andrea, that's right. So, yeah, it was just the kids, and we crunched on, it was everybody across the state crunching at once with the Farm to School program. So it was a lot of fun. And I ate raw quince for the first time, and it was actually really good. I was surprised. Just slice it really thin. And then red cabbage. Then it was from their garden. It's an impressive charter school. They have a farming slant to their education, and it is a beautiful piece of property, and the kids get dirty a lot. So I just wanted to plug that.
Elin Miller for the record, just a couple things. I had the chance to speak to the Douglas County Farm Bureau, and I thank for getting some background to me, but let me the take home, I talked about our strategic plan and the amount of people that came up to talk to me afterwards to say, wow, I can't believe that, we like ODA, but the fact that ODA has charted a course and focused on things, and that actually even leads to, you've included the customer service survey results in this. So the fact that we're measuring and focusing in areas that are important, I think are really, really critical. But it was just a great, it was kind of a local yokel thing for me, but it was really great to hear the great feedback in what ODA is doing. So I just wanted to mention that too. Okay, if there's no additional. Representative Scharf, you are on the line. It's hard for me to see the screen. Everybody is really, really tiny. So welcome. If you wanted to say a few words, that's great.
Thank you for that. But I'm going to stay quiet and off camera because I had nasal surgery on Monday. So I'm just here to listen.
Oh, well, thank you. Hope you get feeling better.
Thank you.
So, okay. And again, we had the department reports, I'll say department reports, which have program reports as part of the department reports in the packet at this time. So are there any questions in regards to that? I'll just say again, when you read through this, the breadth and the depth is absolutely amazing of all the places and people that the department touches. So any questions in regards to that? Director Orem.
Eric Orem. I just had a couple quick questions. First one for Rusty is he's in here. Can we get an update on where we are as far as the grant program on the processing facilities and that we went through this last year, like progress, I guess, where they're at, where we're at in the grant process? Are they, have they started remodels? Have they started adding on? I'm just curious on that. And then maybe for Isaac, under the pesticide program, I think last meeting, I believe there was a question about trying to get, I think, more bilingual training for pesticide training. And I didn't see anything specific to that. I was just curious if we've kind of addressed that or came up with more ideas to make training easy, more accessible. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks. So let's have Lindsay, Rusty, and Isaac, and probably Jonathan come to the table because there are multiple parts of this in terms of what we're working on in different places and to be able to speak to the different pieces of progress.
Lindsay Eng, Department of Ag for the record. I can address the meat processing grants. So we are in our second phase of them. Most of the grantees are still in process. We've had a few that have made it to state processing. I believe we're doing 2 facilities now under the state meat inspection program. And the rest are kind of in process, but we've also helped quite a few transition to the USDA program because the state is essentially the same. So those grants continue. Most of them are about halfway through their construction. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I gave at Cattlemen's last week, so I'd be happy to share that with the board as well. And that kind of details out where those are. I did also, just of note, which I think was very interesting to me coming into the program, I think not being there at the start, is I heard from a lot of cattlemen that were at the OCA convention that there continues to be a lack of slaughter capacity in the state, particularly with the custom exempt operations. And in some ways, in some areas, it's gotten worse with the investments that the state has made in these in these facilities, partially because their businesses also that are growing, and also I think because of efficiencies, right? So as they get bigger and they have more slaughter days, they want larger lots of cattle to be more efficient. And so we heard pretty clearly that that is still a struggle within the state. So we're kind of hoping for feedback and want to continue the conversation around that because it continues to be a core infrastructure issue in Oregon.
Thank you.
Maybe to the bilingual issue, unless there's more to do on the grant. Okay.
Yeah, Isaac Stapleton for the record. So in terms of the work to improve our bilingual materials for pesticide applicator licensees, recently we've brought on a limited duration position within the certification and training program to build some additional capacity so that we can continue some of that work. Part of that work directly relates to the implementation of our certification plan with EPA. So we are going through the process of doing a whole certification plan implementation that was mandated by EPA. They did some major changes a couple of years ago, and we're in the midst of that. So as that plan continues to move forward, those materials are slated to be updated. So it's going to be an iterative process. It's a big lift to have these materials updated and then translated. So it is improving. It's improving slower than I think we would like it to see. We have additionally asked for some capacity in our budget into that program for some new positions to want to build that and then maintain that over time. But it will take some time.
If I might add to that, ODA met with the Oregon Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and we usually refer to them as the acronym OECD. We're anticipating they will have legislation and a budget request for additional trainers coming forward to help address this as well. So more to come. That's theirs, but it ties into your question pretty neatly in terms of some of the issues being addressed.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other follow-up? Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Any other questions on the division and program reports? Again, thank you. I know a lot of work goes into this, but it's great to be able to also have this available for the public, to be able to see all the things that the department is working on and doing. So again, thanks to everybody who contributes to this this pretty massive report. Okay, next on the agenda is Jonathan and Lindsay regarding ODA's budget and legislative updates. So if you guys could come forward, that would be great. Thank you.
Who needs planning when you just get up here and just talk? Good morning, Chair Miller, Director Sharple-Hansen, members of the board, Jonathan Sandow, Deputy Director at Department of Ag. So I think this morning we'll probably focus a bit more heavily on the budget side because that's kind of a bit newer pieces of information, but wanted, I think, just to try to lay the kind of the context for where we're heading into for the 2025 long session. And so I think, for folks who might just need a little bit of a primer or, waking up, still early in the morning, as we go into odd number of years in after election cycles, there's what we call the long session, where, every 2 years, the state budget is rebalanced and reappropriated, and each agency kind of goes through their budget process. And so, we will have that in 2025. Also in those long sessions in 2025, members of the legislature have the capacity and the ability to kind of introduce unlimited number of bills, and then also the state agencies introduce bills through the governor's office. And so we've talked about kind of the 6 ledge concepts that the department had submitted. And as of last Friday, kind of when the pre-session filing deadline was, we got confirmation that all 6 of our ledge concepts will be introduced into the 2025 session. Those are kind of the summary documents, I think, are in the previous board books. But once we kind of have both the House, either the House or Senate bill numbers, kind of the official text, once they kind of get through that process, we can send them out obviously before the March timeline, because by the time I think we meet again, we'll probably be either up to or through first chamber deadline. And so our bills will have been moving, but we'll make sure to kind of get that official bill text to everyone here, along with those summary pages. And so I'm not going to go through all those again. I know we've talked about them. They haven't changed, right? We don't have our time to amend them has long passed. But those summary documents and those 6 ledge concepts will be officially moving forward. In terms of session, right? We remained a key player and convener within the natural resource agency spaces. And I think we've heard loud and clear from a lot of the members on committees and leadership, but I think water is going to be a significant topic for 2025. The water packages have already kind of started being circulated. The conversations, I think, kind of really have focused around different pieces of the water policy world. And so the co-chairs, Representative Hellman Owens, gave presentations at the kind of a summit that was held in Portland. Was it last week? 2 weeks ago? Last week, and it was really focused kind of around their vision and what they're setting out to do with water. And so we're definitely anticipating that being a large piece of the conversation in 25. And so I think with that though, our big focus is going to be around budget as well, right? And that's going to it always takes up a lot of time during a long session, along with the policy work that we end up doing. But with the budget pieces, it's pretty significant. And so I think Lindsay will kind of go through what the governor's budget is, but just to kind of touch on the two kind of topics that were brought up right before we came up here was, there's the governor's budget, right, which is our budget, and that is what we work from during session. But obviously, legislative priorities come into play significantly, and so we are aware of probably a lot of little budget pieces, but the bilingual training I know will be a consideration on the table, kind of within the capacity there. I'll say that the relationship with Oregon State University is critical and key there. And so we're trying to move together as a team right through that, because that partnership is vital. And then, with the state meat inspectors in the program, right, as these facilities, come online and mature, as does the need for more inspectors. But it's a really hard kind of, when will it come online? When do you staff up, right? Versus the training and those types of things. And, there's been I think it originated in the Capitol Press, but there was, some articles just around, well, we're going to need more capacity to kind of meet this demand. We do have that relationship with the federal government, USDA, for cost reimbursement for the inspections that we do, right? And so it's I know that's an interest, especially within the legislature, to see that they're, almost nearly $12 million worth of investments into the infrastructure pieces, right, continue to mature, be successful, and are well resourced. So, those are definitely, areas that you won't see them. We won't talk about them today, like in our governor's budget, but are definitely, alive and well within the larger conversation. So I think, within that line, I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's other initiatives that, we'll get, that will have kind of the bigger conversations around both policy and funding wise. I mentioned, the water package, that's a very complicated piece where we fit in, is kind of always as a dynamic scenario. But there's other initiatives, and Eric Garmin can probably speak to it better than anybody else in this room. But the Food and Beverage Council, will have both kind of a bit of a policy, but also a funding request that we will be a part of too, in terms of being able to champion the work that Eric and that whole group has been working on for the last 18 months, 24 months, ever. Like, it's calling it itself a different names, but and that is it's a big focus too of some of the committee leaderships that we don't necessarily engage a lot with, right? They're not the House, Ag or Senate, natural resource committees, but those members are certainly taking interest in those, economic competitiveness, right? So the resiliency side of it, right? How do you build it out? So, there are a lot of those initiatives that we're a part of, but again, you won't see necessarily inside of our budget with the governor's side, the governor's budget, but at the end of the legislative budget, might look a little bit different.
Thank you. Lindsay Eng for the record. If I can call your attention to, we call this our budget one pager, but it's 3 pages. Which is in your meeting materials. We have kind of put together a bit of a summary of our governor's budget that we've received. If you just look at the top, we kind of lay out the total funding into the agency by fund type. So as you can see, our 25-27 is current service level. That's what we go into it with, where we should be. Our general fund, you can see on the first line, is quite a bit less. We had a lot of one-time monies that came in during the last biennium that were general fund. A lot of grant monies, the farm worker housing, meat processing grant. So that's what that big drop is. And our governor's budget, you can see, is pretty close to current service level. So I think given the some of the challenges around the budget in the state, even though revenues are looking good, we have also a lot of cost increases, wildfires, all of those things that are contributing. So we feel pretty happy, content that we're not significantly having to drop our programs into the next biennium, we hope. So one other thing that I just want to point out on this top part is we have under lottery funds, it says other funds, project 1 ODA, and that's $15,160,000. So that is the bonding package that we had in our agency request budget and continued into the governor's budget. And that would be the ability to sell bonds in order to modernize our infrastructure, focused around IT. And that is it's a bonding program run by the Department of Administrative Services, and the debt service is paid by general fund. So it's quite a good deal if it makes its way all the way to the end, and will be a huge benefit to our agency.
Yeah, I would just add, this package, we feel incredibly fortunate to have it make it into the governor's budget, and the governor's recognizing our need for modernization. And this, again, it ties directly to the strategic plan, directly to goal 2, and frankly goal 1 in terms of the foundation and what we need to do with our systems that many of them are old, and we all cross our fingers that they don't break.
And then I want to draw your attention to the significant changes section. So this is really the changes we want to call out from our agency request budget into the governor's budget. So it does eliminate our predator control program. That is a program that is essentially pass-through dollars that we pay to USDA APHIS in order to do predator control activities. And then that is also matched by the counties. I thought that predator control they matched also. Sorry.
So it's not a one-to-one match, but the counties run their own programs in this supports. ODFW has the complementary other half of this in their budget, and so the two agencies provide that essentially pass-through funding to APHIS Wildlife Services, but then also the counties that participate in that program, the funding kind of goes to the similar work, yeah.
And then the second one, we did lose a position in our economic development team. That's a operations and policy analyst 3 position that's been vacant for some time. And so in order to get to our goal, we needed to give that position up. And then the way that they kind of balanced, I think, the need and the cuts that needed to be taken, we have additional vacancy savings. That's something that they do generally across the board when they look at our vacancies, and this time sometimes they'll just bump it up. So it's not a huge significant amount that we're going to be significantly impacted in that regard. All of our other fund policy option packages went through. They usually do. So you can see those listed below that we've talked to you about previously. As well as, so here I listed the bonding package again, and there's just a little bit more detail on the next page. And then that's our pesticide C&T package that we just talked about, that Isaac mentioned bringing our C&T program up to EPA standards. Below here, these are all budget continuation packages. So these are just maintaining our authority to bring those forward. A lot of these are federal funds. We have to continue those because obviously they expire. On the federal fund side, I will just say there's been a lot of work within the state to kind of evaluate where federal funding is and areas that might see significant change in January with the new administration. We are pretty confident that while we have a lot of federal funds in the agency, they are pretty stable, and we don't anticipate significant decreases of federal funds or canceling. We have been continuing to see a decrease from APHIS and our cooperative agreements with them for pest and disease. But that's kind of been happening for quite some time. I think 30% cut was our the last directive. So that continues to erode our ability to do that work in the state. And Chris, if anyone wants to talk about that, would be happy, I'm sure, to talk about it while we're here. Again, the rest here is just kind of technical things. I do want to call out, so the revenue shortfalls package, what this essentially means is in our other funds programs, we have to have enough limitation in positions to run them, but because those are completely dependent on revenue, and that revenue can kind of come and go, brands, shipping point programs, it's, we don't control how much we can get in. We did kind of a reorganization, and we cut a lot of positions that we weren't able to use anyway. So this is just a cleanup piece, but we have seen revenues decrease in those programs, so we're decreasing the additional budget, because there are some times where we're kind of charged based on budget size or number of FTE available.
I would just add, we've seen revenue decreases, but we've also had increased expenses. And so that's one of the challenges in our other funded programs. And we could talk about that more holistically once they get through the whole presentation, because we have a couple places I think it would be good for the board to hear a little bit about where we have some challenges.
And I think just to add that to really quickly too is in state government, right? You kind of have to get the permission to spend the money, right, and also to hire the positions. And so if those programs, if the need grows back into capacity, then like these other kind of packages, we just go back and we request the authority to spend the money, right, in those positions. And so while it does show, right, we have, the other funds reductions in the position kind of reduction side of it, it's not saying these are, like, there's always an opportunity to go back should the need and the demand come back for the positions. And so it's just kind of like balancing that, right, to the current state of the programs.
Thank you. And then next is our base budget adjustment. So this is some of those programs that I talked about, the general fund dollars that we received in 2023-25 that are phasing out because they were a one-time investment. I do want to bring your attention to the second one, the wolf depredation program. In 23-25, we received an additional $1 million in that program, but that was a kind of a one-time investment. Generally, we're around $250,000 of general fund support in the wolf program. So we don't know whether that will be lobbied for or come back, but we have not cut our wolf depredation program, but it went back to its previous level at $250,000 general fund. The rest of these, again, one-time investments, and then technical adjustments, given our restructuring previously that Lisa talked about, we kind of tried to move things into the correct budget categories and to make them a little bit easier to manage on the budget side. So that's what kind of all these things are, is mostly just changes and moving between policy areas in the budget. And then the last one, this is the CFO package adjustments. So these were the adjustments that showed up in the governor's budget. So that first one, the $931,000, that's what I talked about at the front of significant changes. Those were the decreases that we saw. And these two others, AG adjustments and DAS charges, that's the natural course where DAS as an agency, DOJ as an agency, they submit their request. And so they also we had some adjustments to what their fees would be to us. So that's all that means.
Yeah, I want to just add a little bit for those of you who may not be as familiar with state budgeting. So general fund is the one place in our budget where we get dollar for dollar with state general fund dollars, and it's guaranteed cash. General fund will be cash attached to it. In the case of lottery funds, there's a budget. There will be lottery funds attached to it, but it depends on the actual revenues coming into lottery and then those being sent out, on a quarterly basis. In terms of the federal funds, what you saw, it's spending limitation. It says you can spend this, but ODA, you have to go get it. And so we would get that through cooperative agreements, we would get that through grants, et cetera, to fill the cash up to actually support that number. Other funds is very similar. It's spending limitation. ODA, you can spend up to this, but you have to have cash from your licenses, your registrations, your inspection fees for service, your brand inspection program, your shipping point inspection program. And so that's based on, number of licensees, what we bring in, the amount of work, movement in the cattle industry on the brand side of things, to fill that up. So it accounts for the costs and inflation in it, but on the cash side, it may or may not. And so that's where you saw some of the reductions and adjustments in the loss of positions. It's because of that. We get authority to do it, but we may not have the cash. And we are in a place right now, 23, 25, we saw significant increases in our expenses, especially personnel expenses. And our other fund programs in many places are challenged on the cash side of things to actually have recouping the cash to spend it. And we still have to balance. One of the places, and Lindsay can talk about it a little bit, or Casey, is our brand inspection program. We actually are at a net loss right now in our brand inspection program and are working from balances from our other funded programs. I think we're about $460-ish thousand in the red in that program currently. We did a fee increase several months ago that took us to the statutory cap for what we could charge for each brand inspection. We are now looking at implementing a time and mileage charge to help fill that gap. We've also been in discussions with the livestock industry about other options in terms of how we might fill the gaps so that our revenues will match up with the actual expenses in that program. We're anticipating that we will see legislation coming that will increase the cap in statute, what we can charge for our brand inspection fees, as well as potentially the re-registration of brands with the agency. It's been a long and contentious conversation over the last several months trying to figure that out. We also had a lot of work to do in terms of digging into our finances and the cost of the program and teasing that apart, and creating a transparent process with those service users. And so we've spent a lot of time over the last 6-7 months really just focused on brands, trying to bring that into alignment. There are similar issues, but not to the same extent in other places in the agency. So I will pause there. Lindsay, Jonathan, anything you want to add to the other funds challenges? Or
I wanted to add that also you see a lot of fee cap increases in our budget, and those were requests that we're doing. We are going to the legislature and carrying those fee cap increases. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenge that those provide, because I think it gives some context to the brands program. So we can run those bills to when we need a fee cap increase in statute, but it's very important to get the timing right because it's only during long session, and then it's after that, and then you go into rulemaking, and then you can increase the fee. So there's quite a bit of time from when you start to see some inflationary pressures or salary increases have an impact if that cap increase doesn't happen. So I believe in 23-25, we had tried to raise the cap for the brands program in statute, and it didn't pass. And so that puts a kind of a further piece there. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of these in our other fund programs. For example, pesticides, we're going to increase the fee cap. That doesn't mean that we are needing to increase that now, but it is quite a planning and strategy game to make sure that we don't bump up against something where we're operating in a negative position.
Backing up a little bit to the kind of phase out one-time monies, you talked a little bit more in depth, a little bit on the wolf depredation. I was curious about a couple other ones. I was wondering if we could get an update on the North Valley complex. I know that there was money set aside for moving there. I don't know what that occupancy looks like. And then the second one was Japanese beetle eradication. We spent a lot of money. We are really close to full eradication, but this is like the finish line. I was just wondering if you had any updates about that.
You want to do Japanese beetle first?
Sure. So for the Japanese beetle eradication, this was, every 2 years, that's always kind of been a one-time funding piece. So every 2 years, we've always had, kind of gotten the funding to come back. And so, while it's not, again, it's not in, kind of the governor's, in this base budget component, and it's seen as the one-time phase out, there are conversations with, folks who are, in groups that are very interested in seeing that continue. And, it's always, and it has been those conversations during legislative budget development on kind of getting those funding, that funding level back in. I think in the 23-25 budget cycle, there was kind of, just a lot of questions around, is there a different type of approach instead of, kind of allocating funds to maybe, eradicating a single type of species, like working with, the vine mealybug, the grasshoppers, right? Developing a kind of a more comprehensive piece, that kind of, it still came out as, kind of, the Japanese beetle eradication, grasshoppers, vine mealybug. And so I expect those conversations will continue into 2025.
And
if you want a JB specific update, I think we're happy to do that kind of like maybe at the next board meeting.
Yeah, so let's do that in March because, we've had a chance to tour it and it's just good to see. But Josh, did you have anything else?
No, the North Valley Complex.
Yeah, well, and that's what we were talking about, the North Valley Complex, just to do a comprehensive.
Oh, in March.
Oh, yeah, I can give a quick update. So we are everyone is moved in. And so all of our labs, we have now our regulatory lab, our animal health lab, which we've kind of combined with our regulatory lab. We do less and less pure animal health work. So those are kind of together. And then our plant health lab, our seed lab, and our IPPM labs, including biocontrol facilities and quarantine facilities. So that's been really successful. That building, DAS owns that building, and so we were able to, that rent is paid with general fund dollars, which is a huge benefit to us. It's a gorgeous building. There is still some space available that I think that DAS, is looking for other tenants. But I would say our labs have more space. We are also, we have been working on the cannabis lab. So we will be the reference laboratory for cannabis. So there's been a lot of work going into that and new equipment going into the lab, and in partnership with OLCC. They are at the last stages of kind of doing pilot projects in order to have that up and running. So it's been great. We also, I will just, for interest, human interest, there was a great story in the Oregonian, I think, about some of the art that DAS commissioned for the building. And it's kind of related to lab practices and the microscope. We'll try and find that article and get it to you guys. It was really interesting and really great.
Great. Right. Actually, Elin Miller, for the record, my question on the vine mealybug was answered, Jonathan, with yours. But could we just talk a little bit about the practical impact of the predator control program implication? I was kind of a little confused on who pays what, and with $500,000 going away, and it's saying here it will have to be made up, from local funds, I guess, to pay APHIS. Just practical implications for that.
So let me start. Okay. And then I'll look for some help from the rest of the team. Predator control, as Lindsay mentioned, is a pass-through. They're state dollars that go to USDA Wildlife Services, which is part of APHIS, in the state for local predator control work. A lot of this, so think about coyotes, crows, etc. Part of the money traditionally has been with ODA. Part of the money has been with ODF and W. This has had a perpetual life of in and out of the agency budget. For agency request budget, it typically ends up on our cut list. And remember, by statute, we have to put up 10% of each of our fund types as options for budget reductions. And then it makes its way through the process. Sometimes it's in the governor's budget, sometimes it's not. Then there traditionally has been a tremendous amount of legislative discussion around it, and some decision is made for how that program is funded. From an agency perspective, we have limited general fund in the agency. I think you guys have seen that. And it typically goes to staffing and core programs. So when you're talking about having to look at a 10% reduction by every fund type, especially general fund, we look to our pass-through dollars pretty at the top of the list, because look back to the strategic plan. What have we been talking about? We've been talking about rebuilding the foundation. What is the foundation of ODA? The foundation of ODA is our people. And so general fund reductions, when you are limited, as limited in general fund as we are, and it all goes to people, if there are pass-through dollars in terms of the priority, we're going to go ahead and try and keep the staffing versus the pass-through dollars. So it was on the agency's reduction list. So I don't want to say this is a surprise. It's not to us. And having been through this process over my career multiple times, we've seen this happen, and then there'll be a legislative discussion about it to determine what happens.
That's helpful.
Does that help?
Yes, that
Context.
definitely helps. And Rusty, do you have anything to add then?
No, I think Lisa's got it well in hand.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful, because again, leading into that big discussion through the legislature. So, okay.
And I would say this, just like to add on and put a period at the end of the sentence. It doesn't mean it's not an important program. It is an important program. This is a very important program to Oregon's livestock industry, but so are many others. And so, the challenge for us, again, it comes back to those priorities and how do we work through it. So I think you can fully anticipate a larger discussion around it.
And the Oregon Department of Agriculture's, I think, unique position with really where we stand on general fund dollars versus other dollars. Yeah, it's tough to find anything if it's passed through. I understand now. Thank you. Any other questions in regards to the budget?
Eric Orm, can you so there will be no state trapper anymore, or just reduced in funds? And just for an example, I know we've had a state trapper in our region, Morrow County, that area, for a while. We did. I'm not sure currently, but in the past, and I know this last year, and the cattlemen were just approached to donate money to help with predator control, and we're actually where the holdup was getting a take permit so we could hire the people to go out and do it. It wasn't as much as, we were putting the money up anyways. So just a comment on that, and then the only other thing I had was on the brand increase and budget deficit. I've sat in on the advisory group, and I would commend the cattlemen and the dairy for coming together. It took time to coming together to agree on a proposed fee increase. It is hard to assess fees to yourself. That's probably the hardest thing to do as a producer. But we do feel that is a very important part of that the brands program is very important and needs to stay. So hopefully we're getting there. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Orem. Any other comments or questions in regards to the budget going forward? Again, thank you. I mean, Lindsay, this is your kind of first kind of time, well, first through a biennium discussion in this position. So thank you for your leadership here, and Jonathan and everyone. And we obviously have, we lost a pro in this, but we, I think, have a great team, including pros that have been around us that are in other jobs now too. So anyway, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Anything else for this? No. Okay, well, we have next on the agenda, and I'll kind of preface this because I'm not sure all of our speakers are here yet for the panel discussion on ag worker overtime. But in the last couple board meetings, we do this maybe every 6 months or a year, that we talk about priorities, that what's keeping us up at night as directors, and what are we hearing from folks in that regard. And so this subject came up at our September board meeting, and so we specifically said, hey, we'd love to have a panel to be able to hear various perspectives on that for this meeting. We'd also had a task for a subgroup of the board put together a resolution we'll be talking about tomorrow. But I think this is a very important discussion for us to have, and appreciate having folks here for us. So the discussion's supposed to start in 2 minutes. I'm not that far off. I was stalling. So we do have 5 individuals that'll be speaking, and my guess, since we only have one up at the dais at this stage.
Molly's here.
Oh, Molly's here too. Okay, great. Sorry, I don't know everybody, so thank you. Okay, so if we could end up having our panel come forward, that would be great. And we have Molly Pierman McCarger from the Pierman Farms, and she is the owner and president. Nargis Chabet, is that pronounced correctly?
That's beautiful.
Good, thank you. Nargis Chabet from Farm Worker Director, Oregon Law Center. Then on remotely, we have Ira Coelho Martinez from Pacun, and Leslie Tamura, I'm assuming, is going to be remote since she's not here at this time, from Tamura Orchards and Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers. And then also remote is Bobby Harold Frost from Harold's Dairy and president of the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association. So I think we've got a great lineup of folks. We are limiting the time for 10 minutes per person, just to make sure we get through and then have plenty of time for Q&A. And what we thought, we did this last night too, when we had the various seafood commissions. Everyone will have, each of you present, and then we'll save all our Q&A till the very end of the discussion. So Molly, could I ask you to go ahead and kick this off for us?
All right, a little bit of pressure here. Good morning, Molly McCarger, Piermine Farms, fourth generation, and we grow a variety of crops. We have currently we have hops, cherries, grass, cauliflower, corn, squash, and clover, and we've had in the past broccoli, green beans, and other various seed crops over the years. So we've dabbled in a little bit of labor, and we still do. We have farm labor housing, and so we've got I've got a lot of experience working with folks. And one of the challenges that we are going to be facing this year is definitely dealing with a decrease in overtime hours. This last summer, I was pulling up my spreadsheet. I have a very, I don't know, some people might call it a hot mess of a spreadsheet, but for keeping track of picking for cherry buckets, there's not a lot of programs for that help with this, so Excel's my go-to. But I have a tab for overtime, and we keep track of how many hours the guys are picking, how many buckets, and it's very extensive. Because from what I understand, and I'm trying not to, violate any HR rules, every picker has a different picking average, and so I have to figure out their different picking average overtime as well. I spend a lot of time for a 3 to 4 week harvest. I spend a lot of time in the office. And I have to tell the guys, all right, we got to take a day off, because if we don't, I will now have to pay an additional $10,000 in overtime. They don't like to take days off. They would prefer to just keep working and pick, 'cause my crew comes from California. And they just come up, they pick cherries, and then they go back. And it's generational. I've grown up with several of them. And so the family, the last names are all the same last names that my grandparents had coming up. And so, my concern is that if I have to cut how much they're working, that they will not return, and they'll just stay in California and find something else to harvest. 55 hours is manageable, but I think 48 will hurt this coming year. So I'm not sure what exactly. We've cut back a lot of additional labor. We don't grow broccoli anymore because that took a lot of labor. Although high school kids were pretty effective, I don't feel comfortable paying high school kids current minimum wage plus any overtime, because that's a lot of money for a 15-year-old. So we've reduced some of what we're growing. We've made some changes, and we'll have to probably continue to do that. Our four regular season employees are not exactly happy about the fact that come January 1, we're going to have to limit them for sure through the winter to 48 hours. Come summer, we're going to have to obviously play it by ear. So, because we'll have to just get the jobs done. So and currently in today's economic, agricultural, what's the right word for this? That doesn't sound, it sucks. And we've been diversified forever, and we've never had all but maybe one crop take a hit at the same time. And so trying to come out of that and having to deal with overtime, we want to be able to pay it if we can, but we have to be able to cut where we can and still try to get by. So I'm not sure what else you want to hear from me, but yeah.
Molly, I think that's great, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions later on. So if we could move to Nargis, that'd be super. Thank you.
I don't know if this is situated right or not, but so I'm Nargis Shadbeh. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a director of the farm worker program. I've spent nearly 40 years of my life representing migrant seasonal farm workers in Oregon, across Oregon. And I was just talking to Molly, and I did want to let you know that your mom was aunt. Okay, yes. Your aunt was instrumental in helping farm worker housing become established in Woodburn, and there's a backstory to that. 30-some years ago, farm worker housing within the cities is not so welcome. And so when we identified a piece of land as a nonprofit, it was difficult to purchase that through the city when they foreclosed on something else. But intervention of the Commissioner Permine, Marion County, to have that as a passover, and then we purchased it that way, allowed us to put up housing that is model now for nationally, and it has grown to house a lot of farm workers, nursery workers, cannery workers, and their children, and all sorts of after-school programs, etc. I highlight that, one, because we just met, and two, I think that farm worker representatives, people like myself and you all should have more of a dialogue about solutions. And when we have been successful, we have brought change together. And in coming here, I know this is unusual to hear from someone in my position in this arena, but as you're considering overtime, policies around it, I would like you to also hear the voices of farm workers from what I read to you about some of the background of this. In this specific person, her name is Anita Santiago. She's a farm worker, and she was one of the petitioners whom we represented in 2021 when we challenged the awfulness of the practices that excluded farm workers, let's say, from overtime in Oregon. She said in her petition, I think it's still valid today. For years, I have worked harvesting many crops in the Willamette Valley. Even with my hours that have gone past 40 hours a week every season, I have never received overtime wages. Yet I must cover my expenses for childcare with no extra money to compensate for the extra pressure on my family. I hope that you'll agree with me that we should stop treating farm workers as a separate group that does not have a right overtime pay. Here's another individual who has spent his life working in fields. His name is Javier Ceja. A farm worker made this statement. I am more than 70 years old and I'm still working in agriculture. In the years that I have worked in agriculture at many different sites, I have worked long hours, closer to 60 hours a week instead of 40. But my pay does not go up after 40 hours. I have many health problems, and I'm not the only farm worker in this situation, even though I have worked hard all my life. Is it fair for farm workers to not be paid time and a half for our challenging work? He said, I dream that I can see the day that farm workers are not treated differently from other workers because they're farm workers. I want to read the statement of Dr. Eva Galvez. Some of you may know that name. She is a daughter of a former farm worker, I think in the Gorge. And she discussed the need for overtime pay in this way. She said, one patient who comes to mind is a farm worker that I diagnosed with diabetes 4 years ago. When he was first diagnosed, he was in early stages of his diabetes. Due to long work hours, he wasn't able to get to our clinic for his medication or receive support for his diabetes. He didn't have the resources to buy and prepare healthy foods. And as a result, he ended up with an amputation to his toes last spring, she said. I don't believe that farm worker overtime is a political or economic issue. It's a matter of health. For too long, the narrative has been that health is only what happens at a doctor's office, she added. It's far more than that. Factors such as income, housing, employment, lifestyle choices make the biggest differences. Good health choices are nearly impossible when you're forced to work long hours but don't receive benefit and compensation for your work. I want us to remember that Oregon's agricultural workers are overwhelmingly, and this is particularly in labor-intensive crops, are people with Mexican origin and have experienced long history of exclusion and exception from protections offered to other workers based on their status as agricultural workers. These exclusions and exceptions were not based on some outstanding economic model, but irrational discriminatory measures to continue to oppress one group for the passage of laws for protection of others. I asked to join you this morning when I saw your agenda and proposed resolutions, because I believe that continuing the exception on overtime pay for farm worker is unlawful. On overtime, agricultural workers must be treated the same as other hardworking Oregonians. Ira, who is the director of legislative in Pecun, speak after me. And I think he once again will speak to you about long hours without overtime and the effect on agricultural workers. The denial of overtime to agricultural workers is not rational and cannot be justified by genuine differences between them and those to whom the privilege of overtime pay has been granted. At this point, Oregon finally has had a chance to move to correct these past wrongs and has produced a compromise of a solution that allows workers overtime by 2027. By the way, I think your resolution, at least the draft I saw, said 2026. I think that the 40 hours goes in 2027. We understand that there should be an opportunity to evaluate and examine the outcomes of economic, but I also would suggest health impact of the overtime provisions. But there must be an opportunity for implementation first. The provisions on overtime still are being implemented, and we don't have enough data to make any meaningful assessment of its impact on farm workers at this time. In the meantime, one thing we all recognize is farm workers do demanding work, ending and harvesting some of Oregon's most prized specialty crops that have successfully earned a high ranking in quality and sales across the nation, if not globally. We would like to hear how Oregon's industry and its marketing is maximizing those opportunities. We also would want to know what work are we doing collectively to highlight not only generational farmers' work that are so important to the state, but also, as Molly was saying, the generations of farm workers who have worked the fields here. You know, I often am impressed by the bulletin board, the bullets, what do you call it? The billboards is the word I'm looking for. As you drive down the highway, you see third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation farming family. And I praise that. But I rarely see farm workers valued and provided that kind of featured among us in our communities. Perhaps there's some, but it's not quite as visible. And I want to say,
just if you could wrap up your comments, please.
I will wrap up the comments, but I want to say we need to come together. It is difficult times ahead, and try to stabilize workforce and conditions for farm workers that are so vital in this state. However, rolling back overtime as the compromise that is passed is not going to support farm workers and attract them coming from California to work here. I have spoken with many farm workers in the field, and those who are migrants from California were attracted to come here largely because of the climate. It's cooler here. We get some relief here. Climate change has changed that for us. They are receiving overtime elsewhere. And so we just need to be mindful of that. We want to be helpful, but we want recognition of the value of farm workers too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nargis. We'll move on to Ira from Pecun, please.
Good morning. Can folks hear me okay?
Ira, go ahead. We just had a little bit of a technical difficulty with microphones here on the table, so please proceed.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Ira Cuello Martinez. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director at PECUN, which stands for Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste and translates to Tree Planters and Farm Workers United in the Northwest. We are Oregon's farm worker union, and we have been organizing farm workers in the Mid-Willamette Valley since 1985. PECUN was one of the main drivers behind the agricultural overtime legislation in 2022 at the request of our members. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important panel discussion. I want to start off by sharing about the origins of overtime laws, which started with the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Overtime laws were created primarily to protect workers from exploitation and ensure fair compensation for long working hours, particularly during the Industrial Revolution when working conditions were often harsh. During this time period, factory workers, especially those in manufacturing, were often required to work extremely long hours, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. These grueling schedules led to physical and mental exhaustion, increasing the risk of injury and poor health. Overtime laws were seen as a way to address these dangerous conditions and improve workers' quality of life by limiting the number of hours they could be forced to work in a week. At that time, employers often took advantage of workers by demanding long hours without paying fair wages. This situation was particularly harsh for vulnerable groups such as women, children, and immigrants, who were often paid very little and had no legal recourse. The overtime laws were created to reduce labor exploitation by ensuring that workers were compensated fairly any time worked beyond a standard 40-hour work week. These laws were created to protect workers, ensure fair pay, and promote healthier work conditions. They were a response to the grueling working hours of the industrial age, where workers were often forced to work long hours with minimal pay and little legal protection. These laws aim to create more economic fairness, improve working conditions, and promote a balance of power between workers and employers. The exclusion of farm workers from overtime laws under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which I'll refer to as FLISA moving forward, is a result of historical and political factors that shaped labor laws in the United States. When the FLISA was enacted in 1938, it was designed to address widespread labor exploitation during the Great Depression, and one of its primary goals was to establish minimum wage and overtime protections for workers. The exclusion of farm workers from many protections, including overtime, was influenced by the agricultural industry's reliance on cheap labor, often from African American, Black, and Latino workers. The exclusion of farm workers was also influenced by racial and class dynamics. At the time, farm workers were largely people of color, and this exclusion reinforced systematic inequality by denying these workers the same protection and benefits granted to other laborers. Farm workers are often paid low wages. The exclusion of overtime protection leaves them vulnerable to poverty and economic insecurity. According to studies and reports, farm workers often earn below the federal poverty line, which exacerbates economic disparities, especially for migrant farm workers who might face challenges such as limited access to healthcare or housing. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Oregon farm workers are earning approximately $34,500 annually. Overtime pay would provide farm workers with greater financial stability by ensuring that they are fairly compensated for long hours, enabling them to better support their families and contribute to the local economy. And according to the Agricultural Census of 2022, Oregon has about 72,000 farm workers currently. The majority of farm workers are migrant workers and come from marginalized communities, including immigrant populations. This makes them particularly vulnerable to exploitation by employers who may take advantage of their limited bargaining power or lack of legal protections. Without overtime pay, farm workers are at risk of being overworked and underpaid. The absence of these protections is seen as perpetuating inequality and leaving farm workers with little recourse for seeking fair compensation. I also want to address the health and safety concerns with what farm workers face. The physical nature of farm work, often in harsh climates such as extreme heat, cold, or heavy rain, puts workers at high risk for heat exhaustion, dehydration, and musculoskeletal injuries. The demand of long hours without sufficient rest or recovery time only exacerbates these risks. Workplace exposure to harmful chemicals, airborne organic dust, ammonia, and zoonotic pathogens increase farm workers' risk of developing chronic respiratory diseases, skin disorders, and hearing loss compared to the general population. Agricultural workers are at an elevated risk for the development of chronic musculoskeletal pain resulting from repetitive motion, of injuries, re-injuries, poor availability of workplace safety and ergonomic tools, and overtime hours. In Oregon, there was a study of 3,382 Latino farm workers found that working in the field more than 10 years increased workers' risk of hypertension and obesity. Statistics show agricultural workers are seriously injured at a rate of 131 per 10,000 every day. Most claims from Oregon agriculture reported workers' compensation injury claims in 2018 involved overexertion at 22% and falls and slips at 33%. Working in the fields is physically demanding and often involves long, unpredictable hours, especially during planting and harvest seasons. Many farm workers work 10 to 12-hour days, sometimes 6 or 7 days a week. These long hours can lead to physical exhaustion and increase the risk of injury or accidents, which is particularly dangerous given the heavy machinery, tools, and hazardous conditions common in agriculture. Without proper compensation for overtime, workers may feel pressured to continue working even when fatigued, which can compromise their health and safety. Ensuring that the farm workers receive overtime pay for extended hours would help maintain a healthier workforce by encouraging employers to manage working hours responsibly. The agricultural sector has changed significantly since the FLISA was first enacted in 1938. Today, there are large agribusinesses and industrial farms who often operate on a much larger scale than the small family farms of the past. With modern farming techniques, workers may be expected to perform tasks that require longer hours and higher skill levels, making it all more important to ensure fair pay. Extending overtime protections would help bring agricultural labor in line with current standards for other industries, recognizing that modern farm workers are doing complex and skilled work that warrants fair compensation. At its core, the question of whether farm workers deserve overtime pay boils down to fairness. It is simply not fair that the people who grow our food and feed our families are not treated with the same respect and dignity as workers in other industries. Farm workers deserve equal protection under the law. They should be entitled to the same labor rights as anyone else, especially since their labor is essential to the economic functioning of our society. In light of the significant contributions that farm workers make to society, it is considered just and fair to offer them the same labor rights and protections afforded to other workers in other industries. I would also like to share a testimony from one of our members in regards to overtime. The farm worker member that shared this testimony, his name is Jose, and he said the following. I am the father of 5 children, and I have been able to support them with many sacrifices. Now they are older, I wonder where time has gone. At what time did they stop being children and become young adults? But in reality, they grew up while I headed to work every day after day. Sometimes I was on my way to work very early in the morning and arrived late at night when they were sleeping. On the weekends, I was gone because I was also working. I didn't spend enough time with them because they were just too many expenses. The prices of food, rent, gas, and babysitting were quite high and continue to rise today. Although I am physically limited because I fell and had knee surgery, I still work with the same effort as always. It is important that farm workers are paid fairly like all other labor groups because farm work is just as worthy as any other job. In fact, if it weren't for farm workers, stores would be out of food, restaurants out of ingredients, and many systems out of control. Farm workers show up to work every day, no matter what the weather or the circumstances are. Yet this is not a reason to continue to discriminate or exploit us. Farm workers deserve overtime pay because they work long hours in difficult and dangerous conditions, often for low wages, and they are essential to the production of food. Extending overtime protections ensures that they are fairly compensated for their labor, promote their health and safety, reduce exploitation, and create greater economic fairness. Given the essential nature of their work, farm workers should be entitled to the same protections as other workers in other industries to ensure that they are treated with dignity and respect. Thank you for the opportunity to share about agricultural overtime in Oregon.
Thank you, Ira. Appreciate that. Perfectly on time. Sorry. And next, we'll have Leslie Tamura of Tamura Orchards.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you could speak up a little bit more. We're having some audio difficulties. It's been okay, but if you could speak up, that would be super. Thank you.
Sure. Is this a little better?
A little better.
Okay. I'll do my best to use my loud teacher voice. Good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Leslie Tamura. I am a pear grower in Hood River County, and I'm also the board chairwoman of Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers. Our association represents the pear, cherry, and apple growers in 5 counties in the Mid-Columbia region. And I also served as the representative for our association on the Ag Coalition during the legislative process for Ag Overtime. From the beginning, our coalition was very clear and united in our message. Yes, let's work together to figure out an Ag Overtime policy for Oregon, one that puts some extra money in the pockets of our employees, but still allows us to stay in business when we are already struggling to survive. At no point did our coalition say absolutely not to an Ag Overtime policy in this state. What we said many times is that there are ways this can work, ways that other states have already implemented that we can look to as models. As a specialty crop grower, we require more hand labor than a lot of other commodities, especially for our seasonal work. Our pruning, our thinning, and especially our harvest seasons are times that we need larger groups to get the work done in the very short timeframes that we are allotted, both due to weather and the growing and harvesting season. For tree fruits, unfortunately, there are really no opportunities to automate to significantly reduce our labor need. That technology just does not exist due to the delicate nature of our fruits and the need for them to be hand-picked. Labor shortages for many years have already forced us to turn to foreign labor programs at a much higher cost, especially for our harvest season. Our labor costs alone are already 60 to 70% of our total expenses each year. And with rising costs for not only labor, but also all of our other expenses, that will only get worse as our income does not keep pace. We pay retail prices for expenses, but we earn wholesale prices for the sale of our commodities. And we accept that reality, and we do our best to keep costs as low as we can and stay in business. But the challenges of rising costs are leading to consolidation of smaller farms, and people are being forced out of this industry. As many of you already know, we are price takers and not price makers. We have very little control over how much we get paid for crops, and buyers at the grocery store levels that purchase our commodities can and have chosen to buy either from foreign countries because it's cheaper, or to simply use that shelf space in the store for other commodities if we try to raise prices too high to cover our expenses. That's just the situation we face. And when Ag Overtime legislation was originally introduced, that's why we said that it's critical to work together to determine a plan that doesn't exacerbate these problems to the point that we cannot stay in business. Oregon's approach to Ag Overtime for the current law included a 4-year phase-in before starting the permanent 40-hour threshold, a loan option through the state, and a tax credit. And I'd like to explain why, unfortunately, these options or these methods just don't work. The phase-in, it's really not a matter of needing more time. The circumstances we face for our seasonal work needs are not going to change. And as I said, there's no automation option to change that. So a longer phase-in will really not make any difference to us. The loans that were available, borrowing money that we know we can't pay back is not a viable option. Most of us are already in debt. Adding debt on top of that is not going to help our situation. And for the tax credit, well, we generally don't make a profit. So a tax credit, even a refundable one, doesn't benefit us, as we typically have financial losses on our tax return each year. And for those that can use the tax credit, the credit actually decreases as the overtime threshold gets lower, meaning that as we are paying more in overtime, we're getting less from the tax credit. Everything that was included in the Ag Overtime rule to supposedly benefit us, the phase-in, the loans, the tax credit, are based on the idea that we can transition our labor needs significantly before we reach that permanent 40-hour threshold. But we don't have the ability to make those changes. Nothing significant will have changed between the time this legislation passed and when that 40-hour threshold arrives in 2027. We don't have the ability to reduce our labor needs for seasonal work, which means the only options are the added expense of paying overtime that we cannot afford, or we try to cap hours as much as possible while still trying to get our seasonal work done in the time frame that we're given. Our harvest season, when we need the most labor and have very small windows of time, will be the most difficult. And as I said, we will try our best to cap hours, which will reduce the income for some of our employees, which I hope does not force them to go out and find second or possibly even third jobs, but that is the reality of what could happen. In this region, we also are very limited in our ability to hire more employees, specifically due to housing. The housing in this area, like many areas of the state, is not affordable or available, which means that nearly all of our employees, both our permanent, year-round, and our temporary seasonal employees, utilize our on-farm housing that we provide for free. Our ability to hire additional employees is limited by our ability to provide housing for them. And we already anticipate losing a fair amount of capacity when the Oregon OSHA ag labor housing rules are finalized within the next few weeks. So our labor shortages are going to get worse then. All that being said, what is the solution? Well, as other states have done, we need a permanent overtime threshold that is higher than 40 hours and or a seasonal allowance at a higher overtime threshold. I provided a chart as a handout that was included in your packet, and as you can see from that, other states have modeled this workable approach. Hawaii, Colorado, and Minnesota have implemented ag overtime policies that have these allowances. In Hawaii, overtime is paid at 40 hours, but employers can choose any 20 weeks of the year with a higher 48-hour threshold. In Colorado, overtime has a 48-hour permanent threshold, but highly seasonal employers can choose 22 peak weeks that have a higher threshold. And in Minnesota, they chose to do a permanent 48-hour threshold for ag overtime. One other option is to create a permanent financial support program, as New York has done. They provide a farm overtime credit, which is a refund to producers for hours worked between the ag overtime threshold and 60 hours. And that credit is 118% of the cost of eligible overtime to account for the extra unemployment insurance and workers' comp expenses. However, that option requires the state to commit funds long-term. And while that might be possible, making permanent financial commitments with state funds is always dangerous. It makes more sense, it's easier, it's more straightforward to adjust the overtime rule to make it truly workable for everyone. Unfortunately, our country's food system is pretty far from perfect. Those that grow the food are expected to subsidize the cost of cheaper food for consumers. And of course, if you ask consumers, they will still say that food is very expensive. It's a difficult system for all of us to exist in, whatever level you're at, but we all do our best to keep going. It's just a simple truth that producers do not get paid enough to cover the costs to grow our crops, especially as those costs grow each year and our income does not keep up. That means we cannot afford the additional expense that the current version of ag overtime will require, but it's not a matter of not wanting to pay our employees. It's a matter of our ability to stay in business and survive. I'm sure that those that support the current version of ag overtime feel that the law has been passed and it's time to move on. But we can't do that because we know how damaging it will be to our industry to just accept it and move on. We know that when the overtime threshold reaches that permanent 40 hours, and we still have to harvest our crops by hand in a short window of time, or deal with unpredictable weather that changes our work schedules, that is when we all will experience the consequences. It is possible to create a workable ag overtime policy in Oregon, but it will require our state's leaders and lawmakers to acknowledge that changes need to be made and to follow through on making those changes before it's too late. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that. We'll move on to Bobby, who is president of the Oregon Dairy Farmer Association. Bobby?
You guys can hear me all right?
You know, again, if you can really speak up, that is really helpful. Sorry, you need to use the big teacher voice. Thanks.
No problem. So, good morning. My name is Bobby Harold, and I am a fourth generation Oregon dairy farmer from Lane County. I also have the honor of serving as the president of the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association. The implement of agricultural overtime and the effects of it are one of, if not the most important issues for my family farm and for basically every dairy farmer I have spoken to in the last 2 years. Each sector of agriculture has its own unique challenges and workforce, and dairy is no different. Dairy farming is a 24/7, 365 way of life. When I do tours with elementary school kids, I tell them that I was at least 10 years old before I realized that other kids were not milking cows before they opened their presents on Christmas. That was just me. Dairy cattle are creatures of consistency. They want to be milked and fed and cared for in the same way at the same time every single day. Baby calves do not arrive on a 9 to 5 schedule, and nature loves to rain on fresh cut hay. This schedule means that unlike other sectors that have boom times for harvest and planting, dairy remains pretty consistent all year round. Some farms, like mine, raise their own feed, and that does add seasonal spikes for planting and harvest, but our year-round labor needs are very steady. It's this steady schedule and required devotion to the animals that appeals to most of our workforce. Dairy workers are by and large people who love cows and love the work. A person who loves the industry does not often leave it. I know a lot of folks who, even after leaving a job where they work directly with cows, choose only to go to a job where they are cow adjacent so that they can still be part of the industry. The stability of the dairy means that historically our workers have been able to tailor their needs, their hours to their own needs, going up and down as their family life allows. That means that on my farm and many others, our workers are long-term. On our farm, we have employees who have been with us for more than 15 years. In my own 10 employees, I count many employees who are family members, multiple generations of a single family, or the friends and neighbors of current or former employees. Dairy workers value the consistent scheduling that dairy provides. In addition to that, more than 80% of Oregon dairy farms provide permanent on-farm housing. Like Leslie said, finding affordable housing in a rural area is a huge challenge. Dairy workers earn competitive wages. Even workers just starting out on our farms make more than minimum wage. Over the past few years, the state minimum wage has climbed, and so have the wages of dairy workers. As farmers, we know that we have to pay well above the minimum to maintain the high level of care and commitment that our cows require. As we look down the line into 2025, we're faced with a minimum wage that will make an unknown jump for the first time. We don't know what the wage is going to be yet. That scares me personally. Year after year, we have seen the amount of our bottom line paid in wages grow, but milk price has not grown to meet these demands. Dairy is not a high margin business. In Oregon, we're what's called a federal order state. That means that the price that we are paid for milk in Oregon is set by the federal government. This means that we are price takers, like most of agriculture. My sole point of control as a farm owner is to control costs the best that I can. And there have been many points in the last 2 years where the price paid for milk has not matched the cost to produce it. It's not a question of spending the money to automate or simplify my workforce. It's a question of what I can actually afford to do. On our farm, when we began the journey into ag overtime, we looked at all our hours paid and we tried to trim the high spots. For our farm, that meant making multiple investments between $10,000 and $150,000 to automate jobs and add technology to help with others. Those investments have saved us time, but the reality is that they were the low-hanging fruit. With the threshold lowering again, we are going to have to go back to the drawing board. The investments needed to make us solvent are much, much greater. For my family farm and most of the others that I talk to, there's no room to just grin and bear it. We cannot pay time and a half. There is not enough stretch in that proverbial belt to make the ends meet, and that gap is only going to grow. On our farm, the next step would be to modernize our milking facility, and that is a multi-million-dollar project. Even that would not be guaranteed to save us when the threshold reaches 40 hours. Farms all over the state, just like mine, are having to make the tough decision on whether or not to bet the farm today on a future you might have tomorrow. Rising wages and lowering hour thresholds, normal fluctuations in the milk industry will continue to squeeze farms. When I first started on the ODFA board 9 years ago, Oregon had more than 200 family-owned dairy farms. We're down to 140 now. No farm is an island. We depend on each other to make the industry work. And what I hear over and over again from other farmers is a plea to make the bleeding stop. We cannot afford to lose more farms, and yet these changes just keep coming down. I recently sat with a group of other dairy farmers as we talked about what the future looked like. One gentleman who'd been in the industry for many years told our group that his employees were his single greatest motivator to stay the course. He simply could not imagine leaving the industry and leaving them without a job. They were more than his employees. They're like his family. They'd been with him for years, and he felt, just the same as I do, that these are his friends. They're not simple check earners. As he explained this to the fellow farmers, you could hear the emotion in his voice. And I will tell you that the wet eyes and cleared throats around the table were the most powerful testament to that sentiment that I have ever seen in the industry. As a farmer, I want my business to succeed. Selfishly, it would hurt me to watch generations of my family's effort be undone. But knowing what I would take from my employees is worse. I have seen generations of people raised on the wages earned here. We have sponsored soccer teams and gave first jobs and watched the toddlers who now let us rock their own babies. My farm creates healthy living wage jobs for multiple people. As ag overtime continues to squeeze us, we're going to be forced to continue to trim more hours. This will force employees who have depended on my family for decades to look elsewhere for the money that they need. I know this because one of the employees on our farm hit most by this overtime trim right now is my husband. He runs our farming operations, and in the summer, his hours can climb wildly. As his spouse, I get to live the frustration of seeing his hours trimmed. My family, my children, we feel the financial pain of that lost time. I know what it does to a paycheck. And as a farmer, I know what I have to do to survive. If I could flip the switch and pay everybody twice what I do right now, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would do it because they are worth every single cent and a million more. But my farm cannot afford to do that. The simple mechanics and economics of our business does not allow that. My farm and others like it face the very real probability of going out of business because we will not be able to afford the changes coming. I wish I could magically fix agriculture and make it more lucrative. I wish that people understood what it really took to grow food and that they were willing to pay for a job well done. But those wishes do not fix the issue at hand. And if we do not find solutions to the cost of overtime, we will continue to hurt workers, we will continue to shrink paychecks, and we will continue to push farms and farmers past the brink. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate that. This is, now I'm going to get emotional. This is a really, really tough issue, and I so appreciate each and every one who presented, providing heartfelt thoughts, concerns, issues surrounding what makes sense for them and their constituencies. I really, I'm glad we brought this panel forward. This wasn't the easiest thing to do, but I would now like to open it up for questions for the panelists. So I'll turn it over to my fellow directors.
This is Josh Zielinski. I just want to also thank you for your time today, to all the panelists. I think we've heard it's kind of an interesting take from everyone. We've heard from
a lot of examples of what I would consider are typical Oregon farms, like Piermine and Tamura. And I think what we see is these aren't industrial farming operations. There's people running them that are working out there side by side with the employees in the same conditions, that while they're not easy, they're certainly not, we're not putting ourselves in danger. I just wanted to kind of point that out, not really as a board member, but as a farmer. And also add that, well, I'll kind of leave it there for now.
Ellie Norris, Director Norris, I think you had your hand up to ask questions or make any comments. Thank you.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And
Ellie Norris.
You need the big voice, my dear. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is more of a, I would say, a statement as a fellow farmer. And first of all, I appreciate everyone's contribution to the panel today. This hasn't been an easy topic to discuss, but if we're going to find a solution that benefits both sides without marginalizing one, we need to keep these discussions going. Leslie, you voiced it very well. Bobby, you did too. How do we work together to support our critical ag workers, both farmers and laborers? And so my question is mostly directed at the board, less at the panel. How does Oregon stay competitive with the other states to keep our labor here and our farms profitable? And what states can we look to that has successfully done this that we can work to start emulating? I again, thank you for this panel. It was fantastic and definitely emotional.
Dean Simonich.
Stacy Simonich for the record. I too want to thank all of the panelists today. Very, of course, emotional, but also very important. And I want to thank Leslie Tamura for the table that she provided summarizing ag overtime laws by state. I just want to confirm that these 7 states are the only states in the U.S. that have ag overtime laws. Can you confirm that?
Can someone confirm that? I think that is the case.
Yes, I believe these are the 7.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just confirming that, yes, based on our research during the legislative process, these are the 7 states that have implemented an ag overtime law.
Thank you.
Miguel Lopez for the record. So my question is directed to the farming families that presented today. As you explore the changes with overtime and there is no coming back from this legislation, are you exploring the additional add-on of employees across the board? We talk about not paying them ag overtime, but we also don't talk about the fact that maybe in lieu of paying overtime, we add more employees to the structure at staggered days as well. Is there that opportunity you guys have explored?
I can address that from the tree fruit industry.
Yeah, we could hear from each of you. We have time, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay. As I said in my presentation, that is theoretically an option to increase the number of employees, therefore being able to reduce everyone's hours. But again, we are really limited and hindered by our ability to provide housing. Almost all of the ag employees in this area, we house them for free. And if we cannot afford to build additional housing, then we cannot have additional employees. And that's just a reality for this region and a lot of regions in the state.
Yeah, with Leslie, we have on-farm housing as well.
This is Molly for the record.
Oh, sorry, no problem, Molly. And currently, once we get the final rules for the promotion for labor housing, early estimates that I've gotten from a contractor, we will have to probably spend $350,000 to $400,000 to upgrade everything. to be compliant. In a year where we literally lost that amount of money due to a variety of contracts being not honored. And so we're at a kind of an impasse right now going, how do we deal with this? If we don't have that housing, we won't have space for that crew and those employees. And we will have to cut it in half. And I don't know what to, I honestly don't know what the answer is because, like I said earlier, our crew comes from California, and I could try to find a local crew, but I can tell you that that's not as easy because these guys are, I mean, they are a skilled bunch. Like this is watching them work is impressive, and so to find that replacement or add-on is very difficult for things like picking cherries. For our year-round employees, we've talked about potentially just not increasing their wages and leaving it flat to offset any potential overtime costs. You know, I know that doesn't sound great, but that is, as we're sitting looking at our budgets, our budgets are literally between custom work expenses and our own personal payroll. Those are the two highest categories, and we're trying to find ways to manage it and still get the job done. And I don't have a magic answer right now.
Bobby, did you have anything to add? I wasn't sure who was on the line.
Bobby, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm a farmer, not a computer person. We're looking for employees all the time. If I could hire the people, I would do it. Like Molly said, it's not just a job. You can't just hire someone. Livestock is the same. I have to be able to find a person that I think I could trust to make the right decisions with the cows all the time, to know what to do. And that workforce is not out there right now. And it has not been out there, at least in our area, since at least 2020. It is just extremely hard to find people who want to work with livestock and are good at it and are willing to do it.
Thank you.
I just had one other thing to add as another thought to your question about staggering crews. What that doesn't address is the employees' take-home pay is 40 hours. If you're staggering them every 40 hours, or you have these guys here these days, and these employees aren't used to living on a 40-hour budget since they've been working closer to 50 for our company for 20, in a lot of cases that's 25 years or 15 years. So that's my biggest concern, really, about that potential solution.
Yeah, Miguel Lopez for the record again. Yeah, so what I heard between everybody that just talked, it's like 4 or 5 different issues rolled into one, is what it is. We have housing on one end of it for our agricultural workers. We have skill sets that are really finite and take a lot of time and energy and training. We also have the compensation, hourly compensation of our employees as well. So not adding more dollars per hour, but lowering their hour rates. Chairmember Zielinski had a good point there with the fact that we are going to be reducing your hours, but we're not going to be increasing your dollars per hour. So now you must live on less with what you have. And most of these families live on one income for the most part. And they have families, not just here that they're helping support, but wherever back home might be for them as well. The part that is difficult at the end of all of this, if we follow this ripple all the way down, is that we, as farmers, collectively are price takers. And that's another thing. Because of the way we have set up our agricultural structure, we have essentially handed control over to everybody else, and we are left holding the bag with the most weight in it and with the least dollars of that weight in it as well. So the hard part of this is, how do we recondition, or not recondition, but retrain the American consumer to a rhyme and reason for the added cost of the farming aspects of things. It's really easy to point at this one little thing and say that's the problem, but in reality, this is just kind of the scab on top of the problem. The wound is much deeper It is the American consumer being taught that it can go to different grocery chain and buy cherries for less that are grown outside of the country because we are heavily involved in a trade program with that program, whatever country that might be. Same goes for imported goods. I stay in my lane for the most part in the agricultural sector of winemaking and wine growing. We compete with other regions around the world that ship in wines for cheaper. We have consumers come into our tasting rooms, into our vineyards and wineries and ask us, well, why is it so much cheaper? Like, why are you so much more? And there's a lot of aspects there that we don't really get to show with them. I think our biggest issue as agriculture is an authenticity component. We struggle to really be authentic and say, you want to know the truth? Here's the truth. The reason this costs so much is because we're helping feed 5 generations of families that worked with us. And they too are part of our family. And the hard line that we have to draw in the sand is, as business owners, we then have to say, as much as I would love to, I can't do more than what I can. And that's where it gets tough for all of us. So, yeah, I think that was more of a comment and follow-up. But I really appreciate everybody that presented today. You folks have done immense work, and you're heard. We understand it. We hear it. And as Chair Miller has said, how do we collectively go forward and work together? Not against each other, but together, because we're all in the same boat on this one.
Thank you. I believe that Representative Scharf has her hand up, so I'll turn to you.
Thank you. I'm going to take the rep hat off for 1 second and throw the farmer hat off. And I really did not intend to comment, and I greatly appreciate you allowing me to. But I just, from our farm perspective, I just want to throw in the why not hire more folks. You know, with our 10 to 15 year-round employees, if I were to hire more people and cut their hours, number one, I'm doing them a disservice because my employees want their hours. They're used to a certain standard of living and a certain wage. But if I could even find people to hire, which is almost impossible, and I don't provide housing, and I live close enough to Salem and Dallas and other areas that I could draw a workforce if I could even find it. But what hasn't been mentioned is I don't want to go over 25 employees. Because the minute I go over 25 employees, I throw myself into a whole other bracket of state regulations and rules and benefits and things that pile on top of that cost. And so, we're walking a really fine line, and I don't have a solution. But at the end of the day, we all want to take care of our workers, and I appreciate everything that everybody had here today to say. But my employees are going to suffer come January 1 because they're all going to take a pay cut, and that sucks. So thank you so much to the board for putting this together today.
Yes, Director Allen, question.
Yeah, Chad Allen for the record, and probably butcher this, but this is for Nargis from Oregon Law Center. As this overtime law has been implemented in our neighboring states to the south and north of us, have there been any, we've talked about this, reducing hours and the potential that impacting, what those farmer workers were originally being paid, or, assuming they were being paid every month. Has there been any reality to that happening? And what's been that, has there been any, unexpected consequences, I guess, of this new law that's gone into other states that we can learn from? Or is it one of those things that, we talk about, but it really hasn't materialized?
Well, as you know, I practice in Oregon, so my orientation and focus is solely in Oregon. To the extent that I know something about the migrant stream, I think, suffice it to say, it depends on who you ask. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's been enough years to examine data that is fair to either side to comment. Mm-hmm. I can tell you with confidence that farm workers, many who are migrants, and I have traveled in my work every year to all different corners and labor camps, etc. Deeply familiar with them. And I know the importance of migrant workers into the state and the skill set that Molly was talking about and every one of you knows. It's not as easy, I'm sure, of just going out and replacing people with whoever. But I just want to impress upon you, isn't it then all the more reason that we should focus on what can be done here and now? And I'm not just looking at the producers or farmers around the table or the policymakers, but collectively, to do something so that people are, in fact, paid for the hours. Is it fair for farm workers to forego hours that they work overtime and get paid at regular, because that's the way it's always been? I know it's been, the rollout for this is what, 4 or 5 years. It won't go into full effect until 2027 for 40 hours. And there has been some level of tax credits. I know some people say that it hasn't been useful for them. But I guess what I'm trying to impress upon you is, if we live with a model that frankly was faulty to begin with for 80 years, isn't that enough time? Isn't that enough time for us collectively to do something differently so that none of us around this table bear the cost, and particularly farm workers who are not here, to the extent they're not here? You know, the future generation in this state is going to be highly diverse and of Hispanic background. What are we doing to stabilize that workforce here and their educational outlook? I know, Professor Dean, you would agree with this. And bringing in foreign workers is great, temporarily, but what does that do to our communities' bond together in developing those kids? When I talked about the housing that we were mentioning, it has made a huge difference in that area, because kids have more chance of going to high school and going to college, things that people dreamt about. And so the housing, you know, I mean, this is a longer conversation, and I know we're out of time, but it's true that there's going to be changes in the housing. May I say that there hadn't been changes to the housing in decades in a way that made a difference for farm workers. And so I think, you know, there are solutions. There are community-based housing that could be exercised collectively around the state, focused on farm workers, more so than now, or migrant farm workers. We can examine those. It's just a matter of, you know, people coming together in good faith.
Dr. Allen, can I answer your question? Molly McCarger. One of our, I call him our boss man, who comes up. He's been coming to our farm since he was 5. He is 3 years older than I am. I've known him longer than I've known most of my good friends. He has a 6th grade education. Let me just tell you, the guy is the hardest working human being I've ever known. He and his brothers, his brother and sister-in-law managed the crew before him, and before them it was his sister-in-law's parents who managed the crew for my grandparents. I've had my youngest daughter translate Miguel's text messages to me sometimes, because phonetically I don't. But I've known him forever and ever, and the guy has a labor contracting business with his brothers. They have a trucking business. He owns 32 rentals. Has a very large house for his 2 children. Told me one year he put a pool in, and I thought it was just, I was like, oh, so he shows me a picture, and it looks like something that was like out of Las Vegas, with a fountain and lights and a rock slide and all these things. And the guy works really hard. And he works hard for the people that work for him too. He tells me stories about dealing with everything that they've dealt with in California, and they are cutting back days, hours, ranches that they pick on. If they get to a Sunday and that they've exceeded the hours, they will not work on it. Ranches will say, sorry, take the day off. so I have that, I have that knowledge from one individual, but he works all the way from Sacramento down to the San Bernardino. They harvest citrus fruit, they do everything. And he said that it's not been easy for crews down there either, and for them. So that's part of why they like coming up here too.
Yeah, I got one more.
Okay.
Well, maybe I'd like to make a comment. I know all of us farmers collectively have the utmost respect for anybody who's willing to come work on our businesses, and often as the same as they become part of your family and help raise your children, and are just all part of that whole process. But I just know that through the beginning of this experience of the conversation around ag overtime, I think all the different farming associations collectively knew that we needed to do something different, and the idea that this unlimited ag overtime wasn't the right thing to do anymore, and we all participated in that path of talking about it and coming up with a solution that was going to be Oregon's way. And I still do believe that there's opportunity for that without necessarily going backwards by any means. And so I really appreciate, you coming here and advocating for the position that you have, and it really sits strong with us. And I think we're all, as Miguel said, we're all in the same position here together as a group with farm workers and owners, and we don't want to do anything that's taking advantage or negatively impacting any particular sector. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I make one last statement? Part of me is always curious about what necessarily, we talk about farm workers and working for them to make things better. And I fully believe that 99% of farms around the state of Oregon are trying to do the right thing there's always those bad apples. But I was kind of I feel like I was a bad employee / parent / something, I don't know. But one of our employees year-round came in and he looked at his pay, he had his pay stub, and he said, "So explain this to me," when he had the first time he had overtime on there. He's a 48-year-old man, and so I had to explain to him overtime and what time and a half meant, and that it's after 55 hours, and then explain to him that it was going to change. But I kind of went, oh, he really didn't understand overtime and what it meant. And so it made me curious how many others are out there that don't understand it. And it's maybe just because they've been working in the industry and it's never been a thing. But I don't know. It was an interesting situation, and I just thought I'd mention that. And I think we need to do a better job at helping educate everybody about what it is and how it affects all of us.
Great. Thank you. Director Zielinski, did you have anything else?
I just wanted to say, Chad, there's, we all have anecdotal stories about hours being cut, and both to the north and south, so Washington and California. I know I do. We had numerous people coming in looking for work, and it was like a lot of them were coming from, at that time, California, because they implemented, I think, 1 year before. There is a study being done by Oregon State on the economic impacts, and yeah, it is early on to tell, but certain things have, probably taken shape, and I think maybe that study will help kind of answer some of your questions, but I don't think it's completed yet.
All right. Well, I want to, Director Boyer, and then we have to wrap.
Okay. Barbara Boyer. This has been really eye-opening for me and educational, and I appreciate all of you being here today. Leslie, one of your comments, one of my takeaways from your information is that the higher your expenses are, the less the tax credit is going to be helpful. So that was interesting to me. So that would be interesting to look at. And what was the other one? And then the graph that Leslie provided also, that was shocking to me to know that so few states have ag overtime. And my other one is Molly, you saying that you could absorb 55 hours. I'm hearing that across the board in the state, that they could absorb 55 hours. One livestock producer that I was speaking to compared the hours from 2024 to what going down from 55 to 48 would be an increase of $130,000 in overtime between 55 and 48. So that was, and again, we keep hearing they're price takers. So how do you absorb that? So that was just some information as I'm out there and exploring this conversation with other producers. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyer. I'll turn this over to Director Sharplow Hansen to give closing comments.
Well, thank you. I think just to wrap this up and tie a bow on it, I want to express appreciation to all of our panelists for your heartfelt and thoughtful presentation. I could tell by the board being world-class listeners today, there were a lot of things resonating around the room, around a really, really complex issue. And definitely more thought going into it, and I would anticipate the board will continue to have discussion about it. But, board, thank you for your listening and your thoughtfulness as you took all of this in, and to the presenters, just great gratitude for coming with such thoughtful presentations and facts and perspectives for all of us.
Thank you, and thanks to all of our panelists. Next on the agenda, we have a break for 7 whole minutes, and we will reconvene at 11 o'clock for the public comment period. Thank you. happy to give you an update, but not long enough. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I was actually have 30 more seconds, but yeah, thank you. Carla, have we started recording? Okay, thank you. All right, now we will go ahead and enter into public comment. And we have one individual, Jenny Dressler, online that will provide public comment. I'll remind everybody it's a maximum of 3 minutes for public comment. And then we also have Ryan Craybill from Oregon Farm Bureau as well. So Jenny's from Oregon Farm Bureau and Ryan's from Oregon Farm Bureau. We have both of them here with us today, and Ryan is here present. So Jenny, do you want to kick this off, please?
Absolutely. Thank you. Board members, my name for the record is Jenny Dressler, and I am here for Oregon Farm Bureau today. I wanted to take the opportunity to speak to some of the housing issues that were brought up during the public testimony or during the panel today on ag overtime, just to make sure that you're all aware of some of those cost drivers that are coming down. You're going to hear some about the economic circumstances of agriculture from Ryan Craybill, but I wanted to kind of put this a little bit in perspective. You heard a lot about the challenges, but the National Ag Statistics Service data, we had an analysis done, and it showed that 69% of Oregon farms operated at a net loss, a net cash loss in 2022. And you can extrapolate that going forward as well. Also worth noting that labor costs in Oregon are 70% higher than the rest of the country, the country's national average. So I think that's really important context when we look at regulatory changes that are bound to cost operations quite a bit more money. You heard the role of housing in recruiting a workforce that is needed to harvest agricultural crops, and that's what I really wanted to speak to today. For the better part of the last 6 years, Oregon OSHA has been involved in engaging stakeholders in a rulemaking to make pretty significant amendments to our labor housing regulations in Oregon. During that time, the federal government, through federal OSHA, USDOL, adopted rule changes that, to their housing, to H2A housing specifically. And so Oregon started working to mirror in and actually go far and above many of those requirements. The rules that we're looking at today, because I'm limited on time, are going to mandate really quite significant modifications to housing, including for many operations, just due to square footage changes, quite a bit of new construction, and whether that's plumbing fixtures and under the ground septic, or it's actually building new housing to accommodate some of the capacity limits, farmers are facing quite a bit of expense. I did an analysis of the public comments that were submitted by November 3rd in response to Oregon OSHA's rulemaking. And of the over 240 comments that were submitted to the record, 20 grower operations ended up calculating the cost of above ground construction due to that rulemaking. And of those 20, I would say that the average cost, I did some calculating, the average cost of compliance with those rules was over $1 million per operation. The cost of compliance spanned about $130,000 to $6.4 million based on the public comment, with a median around $350,000, as you heard from Molly, up to about $1.5 million per operation that wrote in. Now, we know that there's over 515 employers who provide temporary and seasonal housing to their workers. And we know of those 515, just over 400, that those workers are housed in over 400 housing operations themselves. And so we know that if you extrapolate that out, that we're looking at a cost, if we had 20 people comment with an average cost of about over $1 million per operation, we know that the average cost of compliance of this rule is going to be in the hundreds of millions range. And you heard from a panel that they can't even afford to pay overtime wages today. And so I really think, and I wanted to convey to the committee today, or to the board today, that I think that there are obviously a lot of pressures from a labor cost standpoint. But from the housing rules perspective, we are driving housing out of Oregon, and we're going to be creating a workforce shortage in this sector if we don't do something to support families. Now, there's a grant program that ODA is administering that was passed in 2023 that is a $5 million grant program, but that's only available to non-H-2A employers. And so when you look at that housing data of some 400 housing operations that are going to be subject to these rules, only about a third of those are going to qualify for the $5 million grant program as it's currently written. So you're going to continue to hear a lot from the ag community. Frankly, we are in crisis. We are heading into crisis. But these cost drivers at the top, and especially this housing rulemaking, operations can't afford $1 million in upgrades. Many can't afford $300,000 in upgrades right now. And so I just wanted to convey that in addition to ag overtime, we're really entering a crisis point. And while we do expect those rules to be, as Leslie said, adopted here in the next couple of weeks, the ag community is at their breaking point due to a multitude of factors. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I know I hit my time.
Great. Jenny, thank you. I'll ask Ryan Craybill to come forward to the table for his presentation.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments today. My name is Ryan Craybill, and I will be speaking on behalf of the Oregon Farm Bureau. We are the largest general ag association in the state and advocate on behalf of Oregon's family farmers and ranchers. Of the 6,000 farms and ranches in the state, 96% are family-owned and operated. Our members operate in every county and serve as stewards of the land. My comments today are focused on Oregon's general agricultural economy in the context of the national agricultural economy. According to USDA data, the projected decline in net farm income for 2024 is 4.4%. This is after a 19.5% drop in net farm income in 2023 versus 2022. Over 2 years, the U.S. farm economy has shed $40 billion in revenue, which is the largest 2-year decline ever recorded. The average loss per acre ranges from $97 to $373 across all crops per acre. For reference, Oregon has about 720,000 acres of wheat, and at a USDA reported crop-specific average drop of roughly $125 per acre, that translates to around $90 million, and that's for 2024 alone. That figure does not account for the even more precipitous drop in 2023. If there is good news, it is that federal assistance may soon be realized based on end-of-year action by Congress. To summarize the feedback of a commodity group leader I spoke to prior to making these comments, it should at least keep farmers in operation for another year. 2 days ago, one of our members stopped by our office and we had the chance to chat for a bit. During our conversation, I asked him, from an operational standpoint, what federal burdens exceed those of the state. He only had one. And I hesitate to even bring it up here lest it become a target as well. State-level operational burdens at various steps of implementation that deserve to be named here include agricultural overtime, which I will not regurgitate, paid sick time, paid leave Oregon, the third highest adverse effect wage rate in the country, a minimum wage that is double that of the federal government, pay equity law, farm labor housing regulations, or Oregon OSHA housing regulations and fee schedules, which are dramatically increasing and exceeding federal levels, a general environment that seeks to limit crops, production methods, crop protection tools, and more, most and maybe none of which is based on scientific evidence, inadequate tools to address wildlife pressures on livestock and crops, tax policies structured on sales instead of profits, and the list goes on. My intent today was to provide a general overview of the economic pressures faced by our friends, family, and neighbors who are no different from the rest of us, except that they are farmers and ranchers. The regulatory burdens they face are daunting even in the best economic times, which these in farm country are not. Going forward, my hope is that Oregon policymakers, regulators, and other leaders will remember that our ag friends and neighbors do not operate their small businesses in a vacuum. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. And Ryan, you've been with Farm Bureau now for how long?
Barely 2 months.
So appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing more of you in the future. We've definitely heard from Jenny in the past and appreciate Jenny as well. So thank you very much.
I'm happy to give Jenny a little bit of a break.
All right, great. All right, next on the agenda, we are at our Oregon Ag Heritage Commission selection. And I think, Jonathan, you're going to help lead us through that, but maybe as Jonathan makes his way forward, I do understand that that Director Allen was kind of on the forefront of getting some of this established, and I didn't know if you might want to say a few words in advance of this discussion. And it's basically Oregon Ag Heritage Program.
Okay.
And here I completely surprised him. I actually meant to talk to you about this last night, Chad. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I've been part of that since the infancy, and there was a winter there that we all met in Prineville every month for quite a few months as we worked our way through the rulemaking process and different dynamics that was part of that whole program. There was a diversified group of people in there that worked really hard to get this thing right the first time through, and I really feel great about that, and we've set up a wonderful program to continue to go. And then we spent some time seeking some funding to actually provide some grant opportunities in some easements, and we've done that, and continue to look for additional funding to continue more of those. So.
Good. Well, thank you for your early leadership, and sorry about jumping into that without having talked to you, but thank you.
I might just add too that, I mean, it's really a neat program in that it prior to that you really only had conservation easements that you could kind of try to fit into a concept to get some dollars to remove some of your development rights that didn't really fit. And with this program, it has to put continuation of farming these properties as one of the priorities, and for that it's sort of an Oregon way of doing it, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Great. Director Boyer, and then we'll turn it over to Jonathan.
So as your liaison on the OWEB board, I was the OWEB's liaison on OAHC, but I've now just backed off of that, and then we have a new representative from OWEB on that. But there is $10 million in the governor's recommended budget. $10 million is in there for this program. So I was hoping for more, but we'll take it, hopefully.
Great.
So thanks.
Thank you. Jonathan, thank you.
Yeah, so Chair Miller, Director Sharple-Hanson, members of the board, Jonathan Sandow. So I'm kind of here just to try to talk about the role of appointing the board members, but obviously we have a depth of knowledge on this board around Oregon Ag Heritage Program, and so I think if these questions come up, please. We have some good resources here around what the program is, what it does, but I think in terms of kind of what the role and responsibility here is in front of you all today is that they are, by statute, there's 5 members, and this is kind of in the memo too, but just running through it in case we haven't gotten that far in the packet. But it's 5 members are recommended from you all to serve on the commission of the Oregon Ag Heritage Program, and so kind of on the other side of the memo there, you'll see the names of the folks who are currently serving, who have been recommended by the board in previous years, and the 2 that are bold who are kind of terming off the board. And so kind of the role and responsibility today is to make the recommendations from those who applied. I think Barbara did a good job on, yes, there's the funding in the governor's budget. In 2022, they got the $5 million from the legislature, which was instantly leveraged for about $6 million from NRCS into that program. And then in the 24 cycle, which I think closed this summer, they had about 10 applications that totaled about 8.9 million. And so there's, I think to Chad's point too, right? There are folks engaging with the program. There's clearly, a need. It's a tool for folks when it works for them. And doing the easements and conservation plans as well. And so I think, part of this is, that you have in front of you kind of the two folks who OWEB and the commission does the recruitment side of it. And then these are the candidates that had applied for these two positions. Resumes are in the back. And so I think the part of the board's kind of conversation and responsibility is just advancing one farmer rancher applicant and then one of the ag water quality applicant to make the recommendation to OWEB to point to the commission.
Okay, so in our packet we had the resumes and the background information on these two different positions that we need to decide and move forward on. And I will start with farmer rancher applications. We have 2 applicants for that. And I don't know if anybody wants to speak to who they might want to suggest that we move forward on. I've got some opinions, but I'll, as chair, hold my opinion on that for right now. But if anyone has any comments to begin on the farmer rancher.
Barbara Boyer. So looking over the 2 applications for this position, I also look at geography and areas that are not represented on this commission. So I am, with that in mind, I am supportive of John O'Keefe.
Okay.
I had to look up where Adele, Oregon is.
Me too.
Your neck of the woods.
I also would have advanced John O'Keefe too, just because of the breadth and depth of experience he's had in agriculture. And I think too, I cut my teeth long ago in some of this ag land conservation and easement stuff. And I think what motivated me was that looking at different ag sectors that may not be as excited about doing this and being able to have one of their own to promote, I think is also a very positive piece for this. So any other discussion before I entertain a motion? Yeah, go ahead. Dean Simmons.
Yes, I would also add that Mr. O'Keefe is very involved in our Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center advisory boards. I also rely on him for his perspective within the college.
Great. I'm kind of hearing we may be leaning in this direction. I'd entertain a motion to move forward on farmer rancher nominee John O'Keefe. Is there a motion?
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I move to advance John O'Keefe.
All right. Is there a second?
Eric Orm, second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right. And Ellie, I sometimes don't call on you, but I know you'll raise your hand or speak up if so. Motion passes. Thank you. All right. The second is the agriculture water quality applications. We have 2 potential candidates for that, and again, I have some perspectives there myself, but I'd open it up for any perspectives from the board on this position. Director Boyer.
Barbara Boyer. After reading both applicants, they're definitely qualified, but I am in support of Jan Lee. She sits on the Water Resource Commission, and I feel like that lens, and she's also on the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, and they They hold several conservation easements, and I feel like her lens would be invaluable on this and replacing Lois Loop.
Right? Any other comments? I too leaned in that direction. I think, again, this is some unique experience that she brings, and with her even most immediate past role that she played. So I too would feel very comfortable in moving in that direction. If there's any other comments before I entertain a motion, I'm not doing Parley Pro 101 correctly. My FFA people would probably kill me for not having a motion on the floor first. But anyway, if I could entertain a motion.
Barbara Boyer so moves.
All right, is there a second?
Miguel Lopez seconds.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to move forward on the nomination for the water quality position in looking at Jan Lee. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those nay. Motion carries. Great. Super. That was great and quick. And again, when we have a couple pros, well, more than a couple pros, I'm sure, in regards to what this position means, that also helps our discussion going forward. So we do have a break at lunch, and I guess I hesitate to try to make up time for something else in between. And since I gave you that whopping 7-minute break before, but I will note that, after lunch, we'll be going into the ag tourism land use discussion at 1 o'clock sharp. And then do look in your notes, because I really appreciate Carla providing, we're going to be going on a tour later this afternoon, and she has assigned us cars to be in. So we're all not scrambling trying to figure out who's jumping in what car. So please take a look at that before we do end up adjourning for the day to go visit the Hatfield Marine Science Center a little later on. So let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be reconvening at 1 o'clock.